The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Dylan DeThomas. I'm the VP of Industry Collaboration for the Recycling Partnership. And you've joined us here for our webinar on the National Sword. What is it and how will it impact my program? To just go over a little bit of the agenda for the day, I'm going to be presenting on where National Sword came from and what it is. And then we're going to have two market industry experts, Hanna Zhou from RISI and Nathan Jeffe from More Recycling, give us some perspective on recovered fiber and recovered plastics, respectively. And then we're going to have a roundtable conversation with four regional MRFs. We are going to be talking with Bob Capadonna from Casella Recycling in the Northeast, Joaquin Muriel from Balcones Recycling in the Texas region, Bill Keegan from Demcon Recycling from the Upper Midwest, and then Hillary Gans from the South Bay Waste Management Authority there in Northern California. We will be asking you to hold your questions till the end. Likely the questions are going to be going mostly to the MRFs from all of you in the communities. You can directly message Karen Bandhauer, who from the Recycling Partnership, who is also on this call, and we will also be compiling and reporting out some of the the questions and some of the answers that we'll be able to when we share our slide deck with all of you following this call, probably early next week. So with that, I'm going to get right into my presentation. The National Sword, what is it and how will it impact my program? So first, I need to do a shout out to our funding partners, without whom we would be unable to do the hard work at the Recycling Partnership, working community to community, connecting the circular economy to cities through infrastructure and technical assistance. So I need to thank them at the outset. What do we do? I'm sure most of you know who we are and what we do, but we're a nonprofit 501c3 working with communities and companies across the country to fix recycling. And we've had a great deal of impact. As you can see, over 500 communities have been assisted, more than 400,000 carts, $27 million of leveraged infrastructure, and that's diverted thousands of new tons of materials, saved millions of gallons of water, hundreds of thousands of metric tons greenhouse gas avoided, and trillions of BTUs a year energy savings. We're really proud of that, and we can't do that hard work without all of you here across the United States. And so we're hoping that this webinar, as well as future ones, are able to help you get what you need done. So what am I covering in my presentation today? I'm going to say, what is the National Sword? Where did it come from? Why does it matter, and what's happening? And then maybe some silver linings. Of course, silver linings depend on where you're sitting. So for some, silver linings can be clouds, but I'm going to dig into it anyway. So I'm sure, as all of you have seen, or many of you have seen, that there were headlines starting earlier this year talking about something that had to do with the export market to China. And as we found earlier this year, that it was called National Sword 2017. And what does it mean? Or what is it, rather? It's been conflated in a lot of places. Some people call it Green Sword, which I think is a reference to the green fence from 4 years ago, the customs enforcement action that occurred during February to November of 2013. But this one was launched by inspections of plastics recycling facilities. Over 900 facilities were inspected, with almost 600 of them had rule violations. Now, a lot of these facilities are what I would call kind of mom and pop shops, so small plastics reclaiming facilities that are hand sorting materials and then shredding the materials and selling flake to the manufacturing sector in China. They've long wanted to clean up this sector, and largely this is what the efforts were involved to do this. And then in July, there was a World Trade Organization notice that China issued where they were going to ban scrap materials from entering their country. 4 classes and 24 kinds of scrap. Now that includes all plastics, unsorted mixed paper, textiles, some glass, and some low-grade metals. Now, some reports have said that this is only for post-consumer plastics, but the customs code that they use to enforce this action they don't differentiate between post-industrial and post-consumer. So this is all scrap plastics that would be imported into China are going to be banned. It also is not just the scrap ban as well as the inspections. It's also that import licenses aren't being renewed for the importing companies that are bringing materials in. So what that means is that even if there wasn't a scrap ban and even if there weren't the inspections on the ground, without those import licenses being renewed, there's no way for those materials to be imported into the mainland of China. And they're also doing enforcement reports known for scrap as well as loads that have been rejected. I'm getting a little bit of feedback on there, so if you could check and make sure that your microphone is muted out there in the listening audience, it would be greatly appreciated. So where did it come from? Like in 2013 with the green fence, it stemmed from a media scandal. In 2013, allegedly, it was a media report from late 2012 of some European plastics brokers that had sent over a particularly dirty load, and it made the national news. In this case, there was a documentary called Plastic China that had gained some notoriety and has allegedly, widely reportedly, been watched by the Chinese president, Xi Jinping. And I think this is really important to, when you're thinking about this, is that at core, I believe this is a political issue for China. So anti-pollution and anti-corruption are really connected, and they're very popular. This week, as some folks on this webinar might know, Xi Jinping, they just had the 19th Congress, People's Congress of China. And Xi Jinping was reelected to power, and he made a giant speech to the country. And just to give you an idea of his perspective and his goals, his speech had 89 mentions of the environment to just 70 of the economy. And I can't overstate how popular these anti-pollution moves are within mainland China. And Xi, unlike his predecessors, really is kind of recognizing that his popularity, he needs to have a stronger connection to the populace. And this is a really important way to connect to the populace, especially with the Olympics coming back to China in 2022. There's even been high-profile raids on national sword on Chinese television. So why does it matter? Approximately 30% of all recyclables that we collect here in the US are exported outside the US. And of all of the consumers of those materials, China is by far the largest. Just looking at one commodity, your plastic water and soda bottles, PET, almost 70% of all US exports. And these are the ones that are properly categorized as they're exported overseas, go to Hong Kong and China. And a lot of that material in Hong Kong is assumed to go to China. China consumes half the world's scrap paper, and 44% of the 37 metric tons that we collected went to China. That means they're taking 13.2 million tons of scrap fiber. And our friends over at the Institute for Scrap Recycling Industries estimate that almost a fifth of all scrap exports are at risk due to the ban. That means that prohibitive content for all fiber grades, according to the scrap ban so that's OCC as well as mixed paper grades, and our speakers later will get into that, have to hit a prohibitive content of 0.3%, and that's down from 2%. That's incredibly low and very hard to do as a MRF, if not impossible. There's not a lot of excess domestic capacity that's ready to take this material, and many are looking for alternative international outlets. The aforementioned ISRI just did a trade mission to India to see what consumption that they can have. Now, to be fair, there is lots of rumored consumption in a lot of the Southeast Asian countries, like Malaysia, like Vietnam, like India, taking different commodities in different volumes. The impacts of the national sword, I think, is we're already seeing the short-term market concerns. We've seen precipitous drops in what prices are able to be garnered by OCC and mixed paper. West Coast is certainly impacted more than most as they relied more heavily on the export markets. But medium term, there's a lot of uncertainty. Yesterday, my colleague Beth Schmidt on the Recycling Partnership staff was at a presentation of Junkyard Planet author Adam Minter. And he made the comment that I think I should really echo, that if anybody is saying they know what's happening in China, they don't, because China doesn't tell people what they're up to. So we have to rely on market signals, and we have to rely on anecdotal data, unfortunately. And so anecdotally, the idea is that materials will end up moving. I'm curious to see what Hanna is going to say next, but China needs this material, and particularly the OCC that we create. So it is widely expected, at least from the industry folks that I've spoken to, that while there will definitely be a short-term turning off of the spigot, medium term, we believe that spigot will be turned on, in particular when talking with mixed fiber. Mixed fiber, of course, is of greater concern than most because it makes up such a massive part of the material stream. One of the things that we've discovered in talking with our various MRFs is that there are large regional differences. Some are buying 3 through 7 bales, while others are having trouble moving those material or paying to move it. And then some, and we'll hopefully get into this a little bit, are producing number 5 polypropylene bales, tubs and lids. And of course, as I'm sure lots of the folks, if not all the folks who are on this call right now, there has been some talk about landfilling. So are there silver linings? This is specifically talking about plastics. MRFs can do that sort for a number 5 polypropylene bale and sell to existing domestic markets. There's also a growth opportunity for US number 3 through 7 consumers. These are a few. East Terra and Integrico both make rail ties out of 3 through 7 composite plastics, and Merlin and Quincy both consume 3 through 7 bales. I don't know the capacity of Quincy, but I know Merlin consumes quite a bit of materials in the upper Pacific Northwest region, and they're also opening a new facility that will be able to consume 3 through 7 bales in Ontario tomorrow. As well as investment in domestic processing capacity. Kathy Wan from PARC has already moved a processing plant from mainland China to our operations in Chicagoland, Illinois. And also there's reports, numerous reports of dozens of Chinese buyers and domestic processors who sell to overseas markets now, moving those processing capacity because they can sell resulting flake and pellet from those while they can't sell the bales of the material. And I just feel like I'd be remiss to not give the big picture of how much recyclable material is left just in single-family homes when we're looking at the millions of tons of material that we're talking about. We have a total of 22 million tons that we're looking to manage, and you can see the large capacity right there of fiber. So what are our messages? Well, you already know that we're having this webinar. Our big advice, of course, is to clean up your material stream. We have free tools for you to do this. We say talk to your MRF. We're bringing the MRFs right here to this webinar so you can talk to them. We also recommend that you don't change your programs in the short term. It is very difficult to change, add, or subtract materials and then have to go back and forth. It's often referred to as akin to an aircraft carrier trying to turn on a dime. We also say to not freak out your residents. Speak clearly and honestly with them. You don't have to hide anything, but you don't have to raise the level of panic. And don't feed the trolls. Just like the prohibitives out there are 0.3%, the trolls are less than 1% of the population. There's no reason to get into online fights with them. Instead, just tell them the good message of what you're doing to make recycling move forward. And again, I'm just going to highlight, clean up your recycling stream. That's integral. We have free tools that are online at our website at recyclingpartnership.org, best management practices to be able to clean up that stream. And we also have a new addition to this, our social media kit, which has 52 weeks of graphics and postings that you can communicate, many of them having to do with cleaning your material stream that are available for you to use for free at recyclingpartnership.org/social. All right, and with that, I'm going to share a different screen that I am doing this one moment. And I will introduce Hanna Zhou of RISI. She is the senior economist in Recovered Paper. And in one moment, I will share the screen. Hanna, are you online?
Okay. Well, thank you, Dylan. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you okay, but give me one moment. I'm
okay.
struggling to get this shared. Oh, here we go. And okay, there we are. Everybody should be able to see your slide deck now.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you, Dylan, for inviting me to this webinar. Again, my name is Hanna Zhou. I'm responsible for global recovered paper market analysis at RISI. This year apparently has been pretty interesting for most people in the paper recycling industry, including myself. So we saw very volatile market movements. We saw new policies and new challenges. And of course, China and its policy change were responsible for much of this. Next slide, please.
Have your next slide now.
Yes, next slide, please. Okay. Oh, so I'm still seeing the first slide. Let me.
Dylan, it looks like we might be having a little technical glitch. We're back to seeing just the basic intro from GoToWebinar. The slides have disappeared, so I don't know if you can try to reshare.
Got it. Okay, so I'm trying to share something else now. Are you able to see this as well now?
Not yet.
Mm-mm.
Yep, there it is.
Okay, all right. Yeah. So just a very quick summarize about what's going on in China in pretty much the first 3 quarters of this year. So at the very beginning of this year, they had this national sort program, which didn't really catch much attention at first because most people felt that they were relatively more prepared because of the 2013 green fence operation. But then the news about Chinese may start to ban mixed paper start to spread around April. And then in July, the official mixed paper ban was announced. And by then, many people realized that maybe China is getting serious this time. And almost at the same time, China released a plan, an official plan to reform its solid waste import system. And mixed paper ban is part of this plan, but this plan has much more than that. So based on this plan, China wants to improve its domestic recycling and reduce solid waste imports, including paper, in the long term. So there are many steps they have to take to achieve this goal, and revising its recovered paper import permit management system is one of the first few steps. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's first take a brief look at Chinese recovered paper imports. So China bought nearly 30 million tons of recovered paper, and mixed paper and OCC were the largest 2 grades. And last year, China bought about 6 million tons of mixed paper, which account for about 20% of Chinese total recovered paper imports. Next slide, please. So where did China import mixed paper from? Mostly they got their mixed paper from US, Europe, and Japan. And US is the largest mixed paper supplier to China. And meanwhile, almost 60% of US mixed paper exports were sent to China. So apparently the US market will be impacted by China's mixed paper ban and other policy changes substantially. So we saw in the first 8 months of this year, Chinese imports of mixed paper from US dropped by nearly 15% already. Next slide, please. So from this chart, we can see that mixed paper price in US started to collapse around August. and nearly all mixed paper transaction already stopped in China. And so we can see right now in the U.S. market, the mixed paper price was pretty close to the bottom we saw in around 2009 or 2008. Next slide, please. So where the mixed paper rejected by China can go in the future, Dylan mentioned that in his presentation. So the first thing, the first option may be stay in the U.S. and try to sell more mixed paper to domestic mills. But the thing is, given the current capacity of U.S. paper industry, we don't think U.S. domestic mills can take the recovered paper, the mixed paper that China rejected all of a sudden. And the second option, also Dylan mentioned, the suppliers may be able to do more sorting and to get higher grades or better sorted, cleaner grades of recovered paper from the mixed paper stream. And maybe they can sell the cleaner recovered paper to China or whatever other countries. But I'm not an expert on this, so you guys may know better than me on this. And the third option will be try to search new buyers other than China, such as Southeast Asia. This region has fast-growing demand for recovered paper, including mixed paper. But again, in the very near term, this region's demand increase cannot match the drop in Chinese mixed paper imports. And also, who knows whether those countries may become as picky as China in the future. So based on the statistical data, about 7 million tons of recovered paper net exports in 2016 last year from this region, and nearly half of that was mixed paper. So this region, like Southeast Asia, is a very big consumer of mixed paper, but it really depends on how gross the demand can be. Based on our forecast, in the very near term, the growth in Southeast Asia cannot match the drop in China. Next slide, please. So next, as I mentioned earlier, mixed paper ban is only one part of Chinese reform on its solid waste imports. And another challenge we're facing right now is the Chinese recovered paper import permit problem. So for this year, Chinese government stopped issuing import permits in late May, and they even canceled some permits issued previously in August and September. So without enough permits, many Chinese paper mills, they start to cut their imports a lot, including OCC. And then they try to buy as much domestic OCC and mixed and like OMP as they can. And that's why we saw a very sharp drop in U.S. OCC price in the last 2 months. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we can see a very, very sharp drop in OCC price in U.S. market and also in Chinese market in the last few months. Next slide, please. And meanwhile, when those paper mills, when they lost their access to like U.S. OCC, they had to turn to their local OCC suppliers to buy domestic OCC. So at the same time, we can see the price for domestic OCC in China increased so much in like almost like doubled in 2 months. So this never happened in the history. And this, the price, the really sharp price change in domestic and US and imported OCC price in China in the past few months basically indicate that there's not much OCC available inside China. So China does need like OCC imports or in general recovered paper imports to support its demand. So it really depends on what the government will do. Next slide, please. So then about the recovered paper import permit, because we're approaching the end of this year, so a lot of Chinese paper mills already started to apply for the permit for next year. And there's no news from the Chinese government about how much permit they will issue for next year. But pretty much the news I heard, or the rumor I heard, was there's going to be a significant cut in the total recovered paper import quota for next year. And if that's true, it's going to impact all grades of recovered paper, and for from either U.S. market or European market, and at the same time, it's going to impact Chinese paper industry a lot. So in the past few months, when Chinese paper mills had no access to like U.S. OCC, and some of the mills couldn't afford the very expensive local OCC. So there are a lot of brokers already started to import finished paper and board products from other regions. Like, they're trying to import container board, a box board, or newsprint from other regions because there's not much or enough fiber available to run their own paper machines. And the Chinese government, they're okay with what is going on. So maybe we're going to see more of those actions in the future, which means, so we're going to see more virgin fiber import to China, less recovered paper imports to China, and more paper and board imports to China. That could be the long run from the Chinese government in terms of the total or general paper and board industry. So the whole thing right now is not about recovered paper anymore. It's about how the government is view on its paper industry and how the government is how they see their general environmental situation. As Dylan mentioned, right now environmental seems like a top priority for this Chinese government, and if this is the case, and then it's very likely that we may see in 5 years, 6 years, maybe there will be zero recovered paper imports into China. That's not unlikely. So in general, we really don't know anything about what the government will do. So right now, everything is in dark, and what we can do is trying to think about the worst case and the okay case, and try to think about how it's going to impact the global recovered paper market and also the paper industry in general. I think that's all from me in terms of presentation.
Thanks, Hanna. If you can stay online, because I think you have to leave a little early. Karen, do you want to pose the questions that came in to Hanna, just to get those out of the way? We'll hold the rest of the questions for the end, but ask her a couple.
Absolutely, that sounds good. So we've had a couple questions come in, Hanna. One question specifically is about why would the Chinese government want to cut imports if it raises costs for domestic processors? What political benefits does this provide since they're not hazardous materials and they're non-toxic materials that are needed for the country? Thoughts on that?
Yeah, just as I mentioned earlier, President Xi and his team, they care so much about, environment so far. Well, at least it sounds like they care so much about environment. So the whole environmental thing is not only about the paper industry, it's about all other manufacturing sectors. So they are okay to see short-term chaos in the market. For example, in the past few months, we saw paper price, container board price increased so much in China, and that impact the end users of those packaging paper. For example, food industry or agriculture industry. So there are a lot of negative, I would say, impact on the overall economy from those environmental actions, but the government are okay with that. They just want to have, better environment. And I guess also they think they are trying to like change their environment, economic growth from like exports of manufacturing products into domestic consumption and also service driven. So it's, like the whole recovered paper thing is only a very small part of the whole plan or the whole map of its general economic growth change. So I think, I'm not sure exactly, politically what they can benefit from this, but from just what I heard and also what I saw in the pretty much so far this year, they are okay with the chaos in paper industry, and they are okay with the chaos in the short term, like general economy. And I think, as I mentioned in my presentation, like for sure there will be like a pretty intense fiber shortage in the future if they cut recovered paper import permits a lot next year. But looks like they're okay with that. Just like what happened in September. So when China decided to ban mixed paper and also like other recovered paper imports, like in September, by canceling all those recovered paper import permits, all paper mills announced that they will stop buying from Hong Kong, for recovered paper, and that caused a lot of problems in Hong Kong. And you can imagine, the relationship between China, mainland, and Hong Kong, how sensitive it is. So after a few weeks, and the government kind of like gave back some permits to the paper mills to buy, recovered paper from Hong Kong. But I think that's only, just give the whatever suppliers in Hong Kong some time to just find a better way to deal with their recovered paper. But for US or European suppliers, I guess mainland China has no patience for that. So, I mean, in general, we don't really know. I'm not 100% clear about the political situation behind this whole recovered paper chaos, but it's part of the long-term plan for China.
Great. Thank you so much, Hannah. So we've had some more excellent questions come in, but given our speakers and needing to kind of keep things moving, we're going to keep pushing along. But I just wanted to remind everyone that we will be capturing questions. We'll be putting together some responses to those and getting that out with both the deck and the recording so that folks will have that in follow-up as well. So thank you, Hannah, and I'll go ahead and turn it back to Dylan.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hannah, for joining us today. Really, very much appreciated. So now we're going to look to the other big part of the curbside stream that's going to end up getting impacted by the national sword, which would be plastics. So when you're thinking plastics recycling, who are you going to go to? You're going to go to more recycling. So Nathan Jaffe, are you on the line right now?
I am. Hello, everyone.
Excellent. I'm going to hand it over to you. Just tell me when to click slides.
All right. So I'll be giving a quick plastic recycling market update. This will have a lot of data, so I apologize if I do get through some of this quickly, but feel free to reach out afterwards with any questions. I think if you click this twice, we should show some trend lines here. This shows a graph going back to 2009, showing a steady increase in plastic that's captured for domestic recycling and a marginal decrease over time. If you look at one more, showing a decrease in export. And this also breaks it down by the different material types, which on the next slide will show a little bit more in detail. So overall, only about 28% of material was exported in 2015 as far as plastics go. And as you can see here, that really varies by material. So for film, a little bit more than half of that was exported. And for non-bottle rigids, about a third. Whereas for PET and HDPE bottles, there's a stronger domestic market that captures 80 to 90% of that material. Next, please. So looking at it from comparing capacity to collection, capacity being the infrastructure that we have domestically, you can see that we have an overcapacity for both PET and HDPE bottles, meaning that we can potentially take more of what has been going export and handle that domestically. The case is a little bit trickier for non-bottle rigid and film, where you can see that collection exceeds capacity. And with that, we kind of have a chicken and the egg problem where it's hard to justify infrastructure investment sometimes when we've had demand from an export market that has been paying well for these materials. Next, please. So looking at the non-bottle rigid part of that stream, in the upper chart, you can see the breakdown by resin. So polypropylene makes up the majority, followed just behind it by HDPE, both of which have pretty strong domestic markets. As I think as Dylan mentioned, there are some people still buying 337 bales, and I'll highlight that later. But the more segregated this material can be, the stronger the market is. We'll also touch briefly on the polystyrene, that small 2% sliver. The map below, that comes from our plasticsmarkets.org, which is a buyer-supplier database, or a marketplace rather, that More Recycling manages, and which we've been trying to keep very up to date with the current shifts in market, so that we can stay on top of who is still handling this mixed material. Next, please. So looking at pricing over time, you can see a couple of major events here. The first on the left being the Great Recession, where you can see oil, which is the gray background, along with all sorts of commodity materials decreasing. And then closer in the middle, there's the green fence, where you can see some of the lower grade materials being affected by that, while the PET, HDPE bottles, and I believe commercial film is also one of those darker blues, which stays higher through that period. Shale gas is the next big hit there, which also affects the PET and HDPE bottles that weren't as affected previously. But the cheap shale gas has resulted in cheap virgin prices, which shrinks the delta between virgin material and the post-consumer resin that competes on the marketplace.
Hey, Nathan,
Next,
this is Karen. Just really quick, do you mind speaking a little bit louder into your phone? I'm hearing that you're a little hard to hear at moments for some of the folks.
Okay, sure. How is this? Is this better?
Oh yeah, that's great. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Next slide, please. So looking more on the demand side for post-consumer resin, More Recycling recently undertook an end market demand study, and this shows the results for the polyethylene side of that. So on the left, you see what was collected for recycling in 2015, the orange being what was reclaimed domestically, the teal above that, what goes export. In the middle was what we were able to capture as far as PCR purchases in 2016. And that accounts for about 48% of what was reclaimed domestically. The gray above that explains a little bit of why there is that gap, both because this was a voluntary survey. Some of the reclaimed material does end up being exported, and also yield losses throughout the system. And then the interesting part of this is the far right, which shows the capacity to purchase. And that we phrased as given pricing and specifications being met, how much material would you have been able to purchase? And you can see that that exceeded the amount that was reclaimed domestically, which is a positive sign. It doesn't fully account for the total amount of material collected, but it is certainly a move in the right direction, and potentially can justify some more investment in domestic processing. Next, please. I won't get too much into this. This is just more background on that survey, who we reached out to, and we were very happy with the responses that we got. We surveyed over 1,000 companies across the industry, and we feel that our responses were representative of a good swath of that. Next, please. This further depicts that, showing the breakdown of different trade associations. I won't spend too much time here. Next, please. So looking at the virgin side of things, which I mentioned briefly with the dropping in shale gas prices. So this shows the upcoming increases to different resin production. So for ethylene, you can see that there's a 50% growth in capacity planned in the next, in under 10 years. So that blue portion of each of these represents that announced capacity additions, and will likely result in decreased virgin prices, which we're already starting to see, further putting pressure on PCR markets, and again shrinking that delta where reclaimers have to be able to process material. Next, please. So there are actions being taken. Just yesterday, the Association of Plastic Recyclers announced their Recycling Demand Champions program. And so I'm sure many of you will recognize a lot of these brands and retailers and recycling companies as well, who have all made commitments to use post-consumer resin in their in-house work in progress items, such as pallets, slip sheets, dunnage, totes, and the like. So there are a lot of positive steps being taken, and anything that's focusing on that pull-through is really important in these times where there are shifts in the market. Next, please. So like I mentioned, plasticsmarkets.org is a free buyer-supplier marketplace that More Recycling manages, and we're really trying to stay on top of who is handling these mixed plastics and making sure that this can serve as a resource to hopefully facilitate connections. So at the bottom here, we've reached out beyond just West Coast and APR members, that's the Association of Plastic Recyclers. So we reached out beyond those at this point, and can add a few more to this tally. But as of right now, there are about 4 or 5 companies currently purchasing 337 bales that are listed in Plastics Markets, as well as 6 companies purchasing curbside film and 12, a little bit more, purchasing retail film. And like I said, this is something that we're really trying to keep up to date with all the shifts that are occurring, and hope can be used as a resource. Next, please. So Dylan hit on this in his presentation, mentioning that there are strong markets for polypropylene. When it can be separated out from this 337 bales, tubs and lids, caps, even some of the bottles, although not a huge amount, that is highly valued material. And again, looking at that pie chart, it is a significant chunk, or the largest, of the non-bottle rigid plastics that are collected, just over 500 million pounds per year. So part of that is going to rely on more processing, either from plastic recycling facilities at PERF or other secondary MRFs that can further separate out the stream and provide a valuable stream to reclaimers. Next, please. This just shows a quick map of who is currently accepting polypropylene in curbside programs. The green, I believe, is bottles and containers, blue being just bottles. So you can see that the majority here accepts both, and it is quite well distributed. Next, please. So polystyrene, although it is a smaller wedge of that non-bottle material, it does have strong domestic markets. One of the main challenges is getting it out of the 337 bales and into a separate polystyrene stream. This can be commingled between rigid and foam polystyrene, but for the foam itself, then densification is essential. Once it has been densified, it is treated similarly to other commodity streams and there are grants available through the Food Service Packaging Institute to be able to buy densifiers and help produce that stream. Next, please. Quickly hitting on film, you can see that there is very strong access to film drop-off locations. So this is for bags and plastic wrap. This is the current level of access, over 90% of the US population. And on the next slide, we'll see that even with potential retailers, if you can go to the next, please, thank you. Even with some of the large retailers or other drop-off points, if they left, given the density that we currently have, access would still remain high, over 85%. So access might not be as convenient in these cases, but still a significant amount of the population is covered. Next, please. And I'm sure I don't have to reinforce to many of you the value of recycling plastics, but just to show it in greenhouse gas emissions, if you look at the blue, that is virgin use in products, and the difference between that and the orange bars shows the savings in greenhouse gas emission by using 100% recycled content. And that's post-consumer recycled content. So you can see it's significant, and we always do like to highlight that when that material goes back into a new product is truly when the biggest impact happens. Next, please. So for local programs, I just want to make everyone aware of the terms and tools that we have on Recycle Your Plastics. This is a quick tool that you can use to help clarify language for your program. So like Dylan said, not necessarily saying or advocating for changes in programs, but this is a good time to double down and focus on quality, and using good language that can help drive that is always important. Next, please. And we also have a handful of links. These are groups throughout the industry. There are also all the recycling partnership tools that Dylan mentioned, which are also very useful. I won't go into these, but I definitely recommend taking a look and seeing what might be of use to you. And I believe that is all for me. Sorry for going a little bit over. I'm happy to answer any questions now or after the presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Nathan. This is Karen. We may end up sending some questions along to you and getting those kind of bundled up with the materials that we send out after the fact, because we did have several that came in, and I know we need to keep moving. Just real quick, you mentioned some of the resources at the end. A few different folks asked, is there a way to find out which companies are purchasing various grades of plastic, are purchasing mixed bales? Is there a resource for folks to look to find those companies and connect with them?
Certainly. Yeah, I recommend everyone who is looking for those go to plasticsmarkets.org. It has a search function either by company, by material type. It gives you various options, but that is all listed there. Like I said, we'll be keeping that as up to date as we can. And also feel free to reach out to me directly, and I'm happy to help with that.
Great. Thanks so much, Nathan. We'll be sure to get follow-up questions answered and back out to folks. So keep them coming. Sorry we can't hit on all of them, but we'll make sure that we get responses to people. Thank you.
Thanks again, Nathan. That was really a terrific set of slides, really helpful to get clarity on some of that, and also to just highlight some of the programs that are out there, like the Recycling Demand Champions, trying to really kind of pull this material through the system. So with that, I'm going to introduce our technical assistant staff MRF expert, Chris Cody, and he's going to do some brief interviews with those regional MRFs that I talked about at the outset. So Chris, you want to take this away?
Yep, thanks, Dylan, and thank you, Anna and Nathan. That was really good stuff so on the two types of materials there. So what we'll do now all is get into some details from a panel of experts from MRFs. And what I'll do is I'll pose just a few questions, kind of grouped for each of the panelists, and then they'll kind of give us their answers, and then hopefully we'll have some time to answer a few questions. So what we'll do is we'll start with I'll just rename everybody that Dylan had mentioned at the beginning. We have Bob Capadonna from Casella in the Northeast. We've got Bill Keegan, is the president of DEMCON Midwest area. Joaquin Mariel is GM with Balcones in Texas. And then Hillary Gans is South Bayside Management Authority out on the West Coast. So what we'll do is we'll start with Bob. And Bob, I'll just ask you a few leading questions here. With the topic we're discussing, what effects of national sword are you seeing in your region? How are you working with your communities and customers to react to that, the changes that we're seeing? And then lastly, as an operator, what are you doing, and what are some of your operational changes to react to these what we're seeing in the changing market? And so, Bob, you could take it away.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate the invite today, and knowing the value of these sessions are typically in the Q&A. I'll be as brief as possible in the questions that you kind of pose to me here. The effects of the national sword, what we're seeing in the Northeast, definitely a crackdown at the MRF from an inspection standpoint, right, on our finished product, especially on the mixed paper, newspaper, OCC side. We see a lot more inspections, breaking of bales. Clearly, with the specifications that's been put forth from China, we've seen an uptick in that area. As far as material movement, we've seen slow movement of materials, specifically the fiber grades. Obviously, with the license not renewed for 2018, there's less orders out there. We've obviously, buyers have moved material off site on China, and it kind of gone to the Thailands, the Indonesias, the Indias of the world. Also pushed some material back to the domestic side. So slow movement, but still movement. And I think the biggest impact has been the sharp decline of the value of the commodities. If you think of a single stream ton as a whole, there's been a 50% decline over the past 4 to 6 weeks of the total value of the stream. Again, simple supply and demand as material is pushed off-site from China to other markets, domestic and international. It has created a kind of a bubble with regards to supply and has kind of pushed price down a little bit. How are we working with communities? I think first and foremost, communication. We've seen this coming. This is nothing new. The national sword has been kind of ongoing for the whole 2017, and we have been, reaching out to our communities. I always advise any community, stay close to your MRF. Definitely take those tours, have an understanding of what's coming into to the facility, what your material looks like. Also, along those lines, we've kind of had a renewed focus on the inbound material. If you think about a MRF, it's really in the waste industry a manufacturing MRF, and it's very difficult to make a good quality product or produce a good quality product without a quality input. That we're looking at every load that hits the tip floor, giving that feedback to our customer. And hopefully we work together with the hauler, the community, ourselves to continue to clean up the stream. Not only from a quality standpoint, but also from a safety standpoint. It's come to the point that these new lithium batteries and things of that sort, definitely a safety issue. But also now that there's new specifications, further scrutinize what comes in the door there, making sure that we have a cleaner stream. As a MRF, what are some of the operational changes we've made? we've increased the labor force, right, in areas that we think it's effective on the sort lines or near the baler, on the tip floor, kind of seeing what comes into the door. We've also, we ensure, I mean, we run 6 single stream plants up in the Northeast. So, our operators are pretty seasoned. Each one of them have 10, 15 years within the business, where we have daily reports on the throughput, and we ensure that every system is running at its design throughput, meaning systems are designed for 15 ton an hour, 25 ton an hour. We have one that's 45 ton an hour. There's no sense in running it any faster, which takes discipline. It's very easy to come in the morning and see, 400 ton of single stream on the floor, and you want to turn the dial up. Well, we're ensuring we're looking at reports every day. The operator is looking at reports, making sure that we're running at the design throughput, and definitely, or maybe perhaps 1 or 2 ton under that design throughput. If you increase it over the design, you have quality issues, you don't have pure separation, so it affects it downstream. And then lastly, depending on whether the specifications kind of stick from China's standpoint, if it's a 0.3 that once the licenses are lifted, and hopefully shortly, we are looking at further modification, equipment modifications. The industry standards are 2%. ISRI standards, I believe China's standard before the national sword was 1.5, and that's how these systems were designed to separate the material and produce a finished product that was along the lines of the industry standard. The 0.3 is something that we don't believe a traditional single stream system can produce, and we are looking for further modifications, whether it's optical sorters, further screening, but it's all of the above to kind of attack the stream itself, the soft fiber stream as we call it, the mixed paper, newspaper, and also the cardboard, more so the mixed paper and the newspaper grade. So we'll probably see that coming down the line within the industry over the next year or so. I think with that, I'll kind of pause again. I think the value's in Q&A, so I'll kind of hand it back over to Chris.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Bob. And we're going to move across country to Hillary Gans on the West Coast. But, 2 things I'll just point out that Bob mentioned. One is, communication from the MRF to customers. And then 2, the cleaner the stream going into the MRF onto the tip floor, the cleaner that material is going out as an end product. So just 2 things from what Bob told us. So I'll throw it over to Hillary. If you're ready, Hillary, please take it away.
Sure, thank you.
If you want me to pose this question.
Can you hear me fine?
I can hear you okay, yep.
Okay, so this is Hillary. Thank you very much. I'm just going to echo what Bob's saying. Really, I think obviously we're seeing a drop in fiber and plastics pricing. We'll talk about that, and I'll give you some details. Erratic movement. We're not storing material. We don't have warehouse space, and we're not stocking bales in warehouses, but we are having a lot of on-site storage just because of the erratic shipping that's happening. I think that's happening really all in Northern California, but I don't see material stacking. Although I will say that I've heard reports of warehouses being filled in Long Beach, and that's Southern California, probably the biggest fiber exporting port in the U.S. So I know people are having troubles around the region. In terms of communicating to the community, we're not ringing alarm bells in the community. We don't really know what this means yet. We're still watching. Clearly, there's revisions to our budget. That's the first place that we go when we hear about China's change in quality. It always starts as quality, but it always ends as price. And what I'd say also is that movement's most important, obviously. We don't want to be landfilling materials. We've had this situation happen before when China shut the door on materials and we had a collapse in the economy for recyclables, and we did not landfill materials then. We did warehouse materials then. And at the end of that process, we looked at our activities and did an economic cost-benefit analysis and figured in the end, we probably, after moving materials around, storing them in the warehouses and having seen some quality degradation while the material was stored because it was stored wet, we got some rejections as well. During that time, we figured economically we would have been better off putting the material in the landfill. I don't think that we will do that until we're really pressed to do that because it's such a risk PR-wise, and if the community hears that materials are landfilled, I think it just sends a message to skeptics that, well, see, recycling is really not all it's cracked up to be, and these guys are sneaking stuff in the landfill. So I think that public image and that communication with the community is really important, and I think it's important to keep our heads high in this difficult time. I think that it's also important, and I want to emphasize that this is not a lot of money compared to the total cost of a solid waste system. You know, most of the cost of managing a solid waste system is in the collection, and you know, beyond that, where does the bulk of the material go? It goes to landfill. So the majority of the cost after that, from a material handling standpoint, is transfer station, transportation, and landfilling. And recyclables for us make up about 25% of our total stream. So you know, a drop in the commodity pricing, it hurts, but and it hurts our budget. But you know, I'm not going to say the sky is falling. And I think material movement is really what we emphasize. You know, in terms of community contact, we do wonder about 3 through 7 plastics and the viability of that market. It seems to be in and it seems to be out. We collect it, we bale it, but we wind up landfilling it about half the time. So we'd love to see some stability in that market, and if the market doesn't become stable, we might consider sort of delisting some of those 3 through 7 plastics from our collection messaging to the community. You know, what's happening at our MRF as an operator, and how are we reacting? You know, clearly we're seeing smaller bookings. We're working much harder to get those bookings. They aren't with China as much. We're Malaysia, Indonesia, Korea, et cetera. You know, what is the revenue impact? We have an interesting arrangement with the community that we serve. It's kind of a joint venture. It's a public-private partnership, and there's that's exemplified by the commodity revenue share that the MRF operation has with the community. The commodity revenues are split 75% to the community and 25% to the MRF operator. And so there's a bit of shared risk and shared exposure here, but I think that's appropriate. And I think that it puts the onus of quality and of the risk on the community, but also emphasizes to the MRF operator that they need to obtain the best dollar for the commodities. Clearly, quality is king right now. And what are we doing specifically? Well, we're hiring more sorters. We're dressing bales and dressing more bales. And then we're dressing some more bales after that. So 1 in 10 loads are inspected. We haven't had any rejections. Maybe they're coming, I don't know. I wanted to give you some specifics on fiber pricing. We've obviously seen drops like everybody else from the high of the market in July. We're getting $217 for OCC. We're now down to $91. That's the current. For mixed paper, we're at $121. and we're now down to 43 bucks. September was kind of a midpoint between those two, so we're half of what we were getting in July, but we're 30% off of what we're getting in September. So it's been a steady down trend, and that's also happened in plastics. We've seen a 30% drop in value of plastics, HDP and PET from the March and May high of the market. So I think, largely I'm echoing what everybody else is experiencing. And I also wanted to take this opportunity quickly to highlight an issue which I see isn't related to markets, but it's related to inbound materials and quality of materials. And it's something Bob mentioned in his comments. It's lithium-ion batteries. And the markets are a hassle, and they clearly impact our revenue. But the lithium-ion batteries for us are an existential threat. And we had a $8.5 million fire last year caused by lithium-ion battery. We have lithium-ion battery fires or fire incidents at our MRF twice a month, and we're getting just a ton of these batteries, and they are bombs. They get crushed by the equipment. They get tangled up in the rolling stock and then tangled up in the MRF. And in a house of paper, you don't want fires. So I would ask that anybody who we're doing a survey of lithium-ion battery risk and fires, and in the MRF industry in particular, but anybody who has experience or can comment about lithium-ion batteries and their risk at MRFs, please contact Dylan or I so we can do this industry survey, and then we'll get that information back to the industry for, I think, a valuable analysis. So that's all I have.
Thanks for mentioning that, Hillary. We will definitely be getting back out, and if you have lithium-ion battery experience or context, please reach out to us. You'll see a future, at least message, if not webinar, about that specifically. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Chris.
Okay, great. Thanks, Hillary. And so we'll move on to the Midwest. Bill Keegan's on with us, president of DEMCON. And then after Bill, Joaquin from Balcones will speak. Just for Joaquin's benefit, I'm just going to repeat the questions again for you guys that I had started with. What effects of national sort are you seeing in the region? How are you working with your communities to react to these changes? And then as an operator, what are some of the operational changes you're implementing? So with that, I'll pass it on to Bill, and then once Bill's done, Joaquin, you can take it over. And Bill, if you're there, you're muted.
Can you hear me, Chris?
Okay, now we have you, yep.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, thank you, Chris. Much of the same experiences that we've heard from Bob and Hillary we're experiencing in the Midwest. We've seen excessive domestic supply, which is resulting in the lower commodity prices. Specifically on the fiber side in the Midwest, we saw a 50% decrease coming into October on the mixed paper, and we're down to $30 a ton on mixed paper here. And on the OCC, we saw a 30% decrease, and we're down to $40 a ton. So I think as we're seeing those depressed commodity markets, we're having to, certainly make some adjustments in our relationships and in the contracts that we have with our customers. In the Midwest, we're also challenged, and probably, I'm sure nationally, with restricted movements of the materials and transportation shortages, and certainly not due solely to the national sword effort, but in part, I think that adds fuel to the fire, so to speak. But we're really having a challenge getting either shipping containers or else just trucking assets to move the materials. We are seeing a loss of some markets, especially PICC line film has been very challenging to move. we're working to encourage upstream management of that with the take-back locations that were discussed earlier in this webinar. But as the material arrives at the MRF, we're having a lot of MRFs that are not able to move that PICC line film. And I think we're working with municipalities to communicate that so they don't continue to increase the variety of items in the bin when we're having challenges moving the standard items that we're seeing in there. So I guess that's the impacts we're seeing here in the Midwest. If you're looking at, how are we working with communities? There hasn't been a lot of communication on the details because it is unknown, similar to what Hillary had said. I think something we have done is a lot of educational outreach and speaking at seminars and conferences and just informing the municipalities of the changing dynamics and making sure that when they're putting out contracts, they're making those contracts durable and sustainable in that there's transparency between the municipalities and the service providers and recyclers so that we can adjust to these changing commodity markets or restricted movements of materials. Essentially just getting a shared risk with the municipalities and the customers so that as we have the up markets, the processors may not see as big a gain, but in the down markets, they're also not seeing as big a loss. And that's what I'm referring to when I talk about the shared risk, and we're working that into both our business model and our contracts. As far as operational challenges that we're making to our facility, we are slowing down the lines, which results in less production and throughput of the lines, ultimately resulting in an increased cost per ton with additional labor, base labor, and also overtime labor. We have an increased need for processing capacity because we have less throughput in the region with our existing assets. So we're seeing facilities shift tonnages around and move tonnages that were processed at a facility easily previous to the national sort are now being moved over to even competitors' facilities that have excess capacity just to handle those volumes. And in the Midwest, we have excess processing capacity. We're only using about 75% of our capacity prior to national sort, and now we've filled up a good portion of that excess capacity and had to shift tonnages around to accommodate for the lower throughput. We also have low unemployment rates, so adding that labor is a challenge. Where our facility is located, we have a 3% unemployment rate, and we're just simply not able to fill the jobs and add the labor. So what we've done is had to look towards automation to help reduce the labor shortages. And some of the automation that we've added is we've added an optical sorter in the last month. It's an additional optical sorter. We've had optics before that, but again, just trying to further automate our facility. We've added robotics on the line, which for this robotic system, there's only a few in the country currently that have it. And so I think it's a pilot project for us, but it's a technology that's developing and probably at this point isn't replacing labor, but I think it holds a lot of promise in the future. And when I say replacing labor for us, that's replacing labor we don't have. It's not replacing someone's job, it's replacing a job we currently can't fill. So I'm hopeful for the robotics and that'll help us adapt to this increased demand for labor and quality. But that also requires significant capital expenditures, which also increases our processing costs. So, ultimately, I think as we look at operational changes, we also have contractual changes that we're making with municipalities to make those agreements more transparent and sharing the risk. And when we're not seeing that in an RFP, we've recently just not bid contracts. And when asked why we didn't bid those, we're fairly upfront about the fact that we don't think it's a sustainable contract. So we're just looking for relationships with our customers and our municipalities that can withstand these markets and initiatives such as National Sword. So finally, certainly increased quality control on the outbound policing the bales and making sure that what we're sending out is as high a quality as we can. So with that, I will turn it back over to Chris, and that's kind of the Midwest update.
Okay, great. Thanks, Bill. Joaquin, if you want to give us a quick update, and once you do that, then I'll turn it over to Karen. And Karen, I'm sure you've gotten a bunch of questions in for these guys. So Joaquin, you can take it away, and then we'll do some Q&A. And Joaquin, if you're there, I think you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Okay, now we got you. Yep.
All right, great. Well, you know, I don't want to beat a dead horse here. I think everybody said most of everything that can be said. You know, we are trying to not have a reactionary approach to this. You know, as everyone else has mentioned, a lot of this has been in the news, in the works. We've expected a lot of these changes for the last several months. At first, you know, most of that was being focused on electronics and plastics. And obviously the inclusion of waste paper is, you know, considering its share of the total basket of goods becomes more concerning, but ultimately, as everyone said, this has been in the works. You know, for us, we've kind of taken a business as usual approach, and it's something that, you know, to kind of mention something that nobody else has said, I think it speaks to why we are in the position that we're in today. You know, while the geopolitics of China's decisions here might be more complicated than I have the knowledge to speak to, ultimately we did have a contamination issue with exported and domestically shipped waste paper in this country. There were too many MRFs not taking it seriously. There were too many MRFs making a ton of money off of OCC when markets were good, and you know, shipping a lot of junk elsewhere. You know, I was recently at the MRF Operators Forum in Chicago, you know, and there, you know, I heard a joke get made during a presentation about, you know, we can't hide the 3 through 7s in the paper anymore. Ha ha ha. Well, you know, that attitude is somewhat has contributed to why we're here. So, you know, Balcones has taken a business as usual approach. A lot of things that my colleagues here have mentioned, and they all sound like they're doing a wonderful job now, and likely always have. We're doing what we've always done. We're trying to make a high quality product. We're doing that by being appropriately staffed. We are also in a job market that's highly competitive. Also 3% unemployment rate here in Austin, so very difficult to maintain a fully staffed MRF, although we do a relatively good job of that. A couple of just small operational changes. You know, we've really focused in on mitigating against this, you know, Amazon effect. Focused on pulling as much small OCC out of our mixed paper lines as we can, where before we might have let more volume of that pass, you know, as a means to A, reduce some of that overall volume of mixed paper, and B, you know, get the benefit of that OCC and divert it over to a higher value commodity. You know, we've been looking into advancements in technology as well, and you know, we've had some long-term plans that have already been put into the works before any of this happened that are now benefiting us. You know, increasing capacity at our MRF here in Austin enables us to run our material a little bit slower, do a little bit more of the quality control, produce a cleaner product than we already were. And you know, and before any of this started, we were somewhat proactive. You know, we were inviting inspections of our material by the various mills that buy our products, so that we can already generate the reputation of providing the quality product to our buyers. You know, speaking to the communities, to the municipalities, I think it's critical that, you know, they know who they're working with when they are signing these contracts with, especially long-term contracts with MRFs. You know, the shiniest deal, it might not always be the best one. And really knowing who it is that you're getting in bed with, knowing that this is an operation or a company that is going to be producing high quality end products with integrity, regardless of market conditions. You know, we all know that this business is cyclical. These things happen, they go up and down. And you know, it's why you squirrel away money when times are bad, or when times are good rather. So yeah, I feel like I'm a little bit all over the place, but I'm trying not to just repeat what everyone else has said.
No, I think that's good, Joaquin. And yeah, it's tough because it's same message. It's nice though to hear from all four of you kind of similar approaches. So I appreciate it. With having to bring up the rear with the four people answering. So why don't we, Karen? Could we go into maybe some questions that you've received from the group? We've got about 10 minutes left on the call here.
Absolutely. That sounds great. We've got a lot of really good questions for folks. So let's start off with this question. I know it was processing, investment around processing was brought up a few times, and there was a question around how much has processing costs per ton changed as the result of National Sword?
Why don't we start with Bob, just so everybody doesn't try talking at once. Bob, do you have any comments on that? And then I'll move on to Joaquin.
Yeah, it's hard for me to kind of put a number on that. I mean, we're kind of going through it the last 4 to 6 weeks with additional labor. I mean, there's really two components there, right? There's the additional labor side of it to add bodies to a line or whatnot, and that's your variable cost. And then there's a second piece of it where there's an investment, which also increases your costs. So, I hate to put a number on it. We'll calculate it probably over the next 30 to 60 days, and I'll just leave it at that.
That's fair, Bob. Hey, Joaquin, can you chime in?
Yeah, can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Hello?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. Yeah, it is difficult to say. Honestly, we're not going to say that there's going to be a change in processing costs. This is why you effectively budget, right? And when you're planning a MRF and when you're planning a MRF operation effectively from the beginning, you're doing that. You're planning to operate a MRF to the specifications and to the abilities that it's designed, both in terms of throughput and in quality. And again, that has to be regardless of market conditions. It can't be, I'm going to skimp when the market's great, and and then all of a sudden when the market goes bad, I've got to increase my processing costs by 50% or something like that. This is part of planning effectively from the beginning. When you get into emergency additions of additional equipment, I mean, that is, I'm not sure of any MRF that is going to be able to all of a sudden, in the next 30 days, throw in a bunch of optical sorters to address quality issues due to these market conditions. So it's a difficult question to answer. We really don't know yet what is going to happen with this. I've heard indication that, things are going to normalize after Thanksgiving. I've also heard that we should expect this, into the first quarter of next year. There's way too much conjecture at this moment to be able to definitively say what effects is going to have from a cost perspective on MRFs.
Okay, great. Just continuing on this thread of discussion, there were several different questions that were related to pricing and downward pressure on pricing and the impact on contracts, either contracts that are coming up, what revenue sharing would need to look like, tip fees, things like that. And then I think related to all that, as I think Bob kind of started out with as well, this discussion of really being in partnership with your MRF, a question regarding what you're looking for specifically around quality. If quality is king, what does that look like to the MRF in terms of what's being generated and shown up on the tip floor?
And maybe we'll do just, I think, Hillary, you had made the quality is king comment. So maybe if you want to try and answer that one, and then why don't we, just so we get all the panelists, Bill, you could follow Hillary.
Sure. So I think that quality is king, as it's been said, all the way through the material handling chain. It starts with the programs and the participants, the residents and the businesses that are doing the source separation. And if you don't have a good source separation program, you're fighting uphill all the way. And I think that communities that don't put the resources into a good program launch and then maintaining quality recyclables are just setting themselves up and their unfortunate partner or recycler for problems when the markets change like they are now. You got to make sure the quality is something that can sell in good markets as well as bad. I know that's harder in some communities than it is others, but I think that where it is harder, more money and more time and more effort needs to be spent by the city, by the county, whatever the agency responsible for marketing where they are. And I think that, that's a part of this, we talked about who's your partner. And that's something that the recycler needs to know, and the government agency that sort of has ultimate responsibility for the programs and paying the bills. So that's where I would say the quality is so important.
And Bill, I don't know if you have anything to add to that. I would just say that probably goes to your point that you were making earlier on the transparency and the partnership between, the MRF and municipality. So the idea of, both the operation and education or outreach to the residents working hand in hand, and then this, how as Hillary, as you're saying, how necessary that is from the get-go.
Yeah, exactly. And I echo what Hillary said there, but I think speaking a little bit more to that contract side of it and the relationship side, what that looks like in our market area is it moves more towards a fee for service on the processing side and a commodity share, revenue share back to the customer or municipality. And in this area, that's typically 80%, 80-20, where 80% gets paid back to the customer or municipality, and the recycling facility keeps the 20%. And so in that model, a lot of that benefit and risk is borne of the commodity markets is borne by the customer. But what we're looking for in that relationship when it relates to quality is truly accounting for all of the material in the composition. We see bad contracts come out that will not count for any residue in the recycling. And I think when that's not accounted for as a negative commodity value, then there's no incentive to clean up the stream. And so we want to look for a full accounting of the composition, and then also not having commodity floors. We see some of the contracts come out and they basically have at no point will we pay anything for these materials. It'll never be negative, and there's commodity floors that they set that are not realistic. And so I think that's the relationships we're looking for.
Thank you, Bill. That was really, really great. We're coming to the end of the call here for everybody, and I just wanted to first I wanted to just thank all of our speakers. All of you guys took an hour and a half out of your time, and I can't thank you all enough. It's so rare to get all these MRFs kind of talking in public and really being frank, and I think it's really important. I hope that our listeners share this. Speaking of our listeners, we had 501. We maxed out our webinar capacity at its top. We recorded this whole webinar, and it's going to be shared via YouTube, as well as the presentations that we're able to. And we're also going to compile all of the questions that we have here as well. I've kept my screen online here about our open source tools that are available to help clean that stream that you guys are all talking about, that all the MRFs to a man talked about. At recyclingpartnership.org, and you can just click on that fight contamination. Well, I guess it's to the left of that circle, and we'll get that done. And you can expect to hear a lot more from us in the near future on how you can clean your stream up. And with that, I just thank everybody. Karen, did I miss anything?
No, Dylan, I think you covered it all. You'll be everyone will be receiving a package from us, as we mentioned, with the deck and the recording and some follow-up on the Q&As. And we just really appreciate your time on this important topic.
Thank you so very much. Thank you to the speakers again, and thank you to all of you who took the time to listen. Thank you very much, attendees. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.